If you've been to Chicago or New York or
Never heard of
Denver,
it.
a lot of other cities, they have what's called City Bike in New York, Divvy in Chicago. It's a way to be able to rent bikes for short-term use, for like short errands. Use it for a half hour, maybe.
They're in the racks right there.
In the racks, you rent them, you go and you bike them, and then you put them back into another station. We're doing a feasibility study. We're just now kicking that off with the city, the county, and Metro, looking at what could be a first phase of a bike share system here in St. Louis. We're having a big public meeting coming up next Wednesday, the 14th, at Forest Park Visitor Center from 4 to 7 p.m. to kind of get input from residents on what they'd like to see in terms of the different types of bike share systems that are available, to looking at possible station locations, to getting feedback on where do we think would be great to have this around, possibly Metrolink stations, possibly along destinations in Forest Park, destinations downtown Clayton. So we're just getting started, but the idea is to do a feasibility study now to see, is it feasible, and get a business and operations plan set up to say, okay, how would we operate and run this and get it to similar to how other cities are running it now.
Let me pull the journalist back in for a second, because on Twitter people are saying that this is like turning into like a novelty conversation, that there are people who really actually rely on this stuff. And I know, Todd, this is stuff you work on as well. What are we missing in this conversation?
Who rely on?
There are people who need the transportation that we're talking about on a very basic way to get to work, and not just as a development boom.
Sure. I mean, it was interesting to listen about the idea of having a kind of a top-down global transportation policy. I mean, a lot of it is rising up from the bottom and coming up. And what you're ending up with is really two distinct profiles of people who use the transportation system. You've got the people who own the cars, they commute from point A to point B, and then you have on the other end of the spectrum, the people who are more transit dependent, people who take public transportation. We were talking off air about the people who take 2-3 bus rides for an hour and a half to get to a minimum wage job, or maybe just above that.
That might take 20 minutes in a car.
That might take 20 minutes in a car, and in between, you really don't have a whole lot in between. So the idea that what are we missing is. I think that if you look at trying to sort of dictate some kind of a policy, actually we're seeing some of the transportation modes follow demand. We saw the big tax increase get approved in the county and then in the city, because people really actually believed that public transportation was worthwhile a few years back, and that even if they didn't use it, that maybe the people that that work in the places that they shop or in their homes use it. That might be one thing we're missing. When it comes to
transit, this is not going to be a battle of the millennials against poor people. What we've seen for a very long time in St. Louis is that middle-class people didn't use the bus. The bus was viewed as the transportation of last resort for people who couldn't afford a car, and people were either uncomfortable in the bus or afraid. We're now starting to see millennials use the old-fashioned bus, and that's good for people who depend on it, because we don't have enough density of ridership now to have a robust system. The more people, including middle-class people, whether they're millennials or people my age or whatever, who are using the system, the more routes we'll have, the more options we'll have, and the easier it'll be for people who are dependent on transit to get around. So I don't view it as, hey, let's create some toys for the millennials, but the poor people got to wait in line. I think that the more people who are using public transit, the better it's going to be for everybody, but probably especially for the people who, as Ken mentioned, take an hour and a half bus ride to get from their home in North St. Louis, to a minimum wage job in South County.
I mean, the political coalition has shifted. The Prop A in St. Louis County was passed with 63% of the vote, which was a bit of a shock. And that was, I think, that coalition between bus riders and supporters of Metrolink, which would tend to be more middle class. So that middle class, lower income, working class coalition. Because I think you're right. Before, it was the bus system. It was, frankly, somewhat politically marginalized. I view it as having some momentum now because it cuts across the class spectrum.
Joe, what were you going to say? I cut you off earlier.
What we're talking about, all these types of transportation and getting around, make perfect economic sense for our city and for our country. There was a great article in the Atlantic 2 years ago that showed that people that live way out in the suburbs pay 24% of their income, their families, 24% of their income for transportation, tire wear, engine wear, gas prices and all. People live in livable, walkable communities such as the Del Mar Loop, Central West End, downtown, 12%. That's a difference of $700 billion a year, which was half of healthcare at that time. It makes perfect economic sense. Back in our great-grandparents' time, 5% was spent on transportation. All these types of transit that we're talking about tonight could have a huge positive impact on our economy. We could be spending that money, not all of it, but we could be spending a lot of it on other things, whether it's education, healthcare, and all.